calling to order the Albany Unified School District Board of Education special work session on the elementary schools reopening plan. This is Tuesday, December 8th at 6:01 p.m. May we have a roll call, please?
Superintendent Wells.
Here.
President Trutain.
Here.
Vice President Duran.
Here.
Trustee Clark.
Here.
Trustee Dobbs.
Here.
Trustee Hinckley. Trustee Hinckley.
Sorry, I think my internet cut out for a sec. I'm here.
Thank you. Student Trustee Mala.
Here.
And Student Trustee Corzo Clark.
Here.
Great, thank you. Student board members, could you read the AUSD mission and vision statement and our meeting norms, please?
Yes. The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment addressing the individual needs of each student.
Our meeting norms are to maintain a focus on what is best for our students, to ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully, to endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's belief in what is important for students, and to make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their points of view.
Thank you so much. That was our opening business, item 1 on our agenda. We move now to item 2, review and action. And I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Wells, our superintendent, for item 2-1, the elementary school reopening plan.
Thank you, President Trutain. Tonight is our special meeting for the reopening of elementary school in-person hybrid plan. And we're going to focus in on a scenario, but I want to take a moment to give a brief introduction before I turn it over to our main presenter tonight and her crew, that is our Assistant Superintendent, Marie Williams. Just to take a brief walk down what I call memory lane. As you all recall, on March 13, 2020, we were given the order to close schools. And I'm going to tell you about what happened after that was just something short of miraculous. We huddled up as a unit, meaning our teachers union, our labor union, and our staff, to talk about how do we open schools not 3-4 months down the road, but next week. And I got to tell you, our teachers were so committed and so determined to mitigate learning loss that we were going to open schools next week. And the issue was how to do that, and we figured out how to do it. As we all realized back in the spring, it wasn't perfect, but we did it. And then we realized our neighbors and others opened up months later. And so I have to tip my hat off to our teachers for that unwavering commitment to put kids first and make sure kids do not lose too much learning. And that presented us with an opportunity to learn, grow, and adjust. We learned a lot from what we did with remote learning in the spring. And so we spent our entire summer building a plan that we called, and you know of now as Remote 2.0, one that's currently applaudable. The work that the teachers are doing, they're working twice as hard as they ever did before to make sure our kids have a quality educational experience. And so I wanted to remind our community of the kind of effort that it took to get to where we are now with our remote learning, something that we are very pleased and proud of, and the community have consistently shared how much they appreciate what our teachers are doing as it relates to making sure our kids get a quality educational experience during these most difficult times. Well, we were focusing on, moving forward, we've been focusing on safety as a priority as we look at opening hybrid and what was approved back in July, hybrid, where kids come to school twice a week. As we evolved in our thinking, we decided to have not just safety as a priority, but have safety run parallel with teaching and learning as a primary focus. And so we were looking at possibilities. How can we do that in a hybrid fashion where teaching and learning and safety work hand in hand so that our kids can have the best experience possible and benefit from such work and efforts? And so what we decided to do was to establish what we call reopening advisory task forces that consist of key stakeholders, including our teachers, our parents, our community members, our students, principal, and a board member at each level giving input of how do we do this work, because we want it to be inclusive, collaborative, and transparent, and something that we can all embrace and be proud of moving forward. So tonight, you're going to hear about a possible scenario presented for discussion, input, and possible direction. It is listed as an action item to afford the board the maximum latitude. It doesn't mean they have to take action tonight, but if they wanted to, they can do so. And so that's what we're hoping to get out of tonight's presentation. In addition to that, it's important to note and pay attention to our current condition. Currently, as we all know, we are in tier purple. And what does that mean for us? Most of you guys know that tier purple is when you are precluded, cannot open schools. And our current rate of infections, and that's based on infections primarily, is not stabling out, it's getting worse. And so as we look at our current situation, we also have to look at what other folks are looking at as recently as yesterday. For example, a lot of folks, and we have to do the same, are looking at different target dates. And so I'm going to bring a proposal for the board on December 15th of new proposed target dates that I think will work, giving some consultation with some key folks, including information as recent as this week from our county and state health officials. Our current target dates are listed before you. January 4th, 2021, TK first grade. That means the first day you arrive after break, we will be back in school. And I'll talk more about that in greater detail next week with my proposed new dates. And then the rest you can take a peek at. And so I'm going to pause here to turn the presentation over to our Assistant Superintendent, Marie Williams. At this time, I hand you the baton.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wells. Good evening, Board President Trutain, board members, and community that are joining us. This evening, it's my pleasure and privilege to bring to you, in collaboration with our amazing elementary principals, Ms. Poole, Ms. Reimuller, and Ms. Georgeson, an update and information regarding elementary school reopening plans. Julie, thank you for pulling up the presentation here. So the principals and I are going to take turns making that presentation. So we thank you in advance for your patience. And we'll want to make sure to leave plenty of time for questions, comments, and discussion. So I'll dive right in. We could go to the next slide, please. So as Dr. Wells just said a moment ago, we're starting here sort of with a timeline and updates. And just as we sort of sometimes think that the situation or the climate is improving, we sort of face another setback. And so here, I just wanted to start with just a little timeline of where we have been just in the last couple of months regarding reopening. We remember that in early October, we received information and we're very hopeful about the opportunity to begin sort of planning in earnest to return to school at the elementary level. And then the board approved target reopening dates, which Dr. Wells just spoke to in early October. And then also we received guidance about potential plans for being able to reopen our secondary schools. Then just a couple weeks later, November the 16th, our state moved back into the purple tier. And then just as recently as last week, the state issued a regional stay-at-home order, which I'm going to cover just a couple pieces of in a second. In the meantime, also, in our district, we sent out a reopening school survey. And the purpose of that survey was just to gather sort of preliminary information. We recognized there were sort of lots of details that had not been provided to parents, and we hope that some of those details will be shared this evening. But we did get information back from our community about, at that time, their thoughts around returning to school. And we hope to be able to provide sort of a report out of the results at our next board meeting on the 15th. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So according to the regional stay-at-home order, this essentially affects regions that have less than 15% ICU availability. I think what is most important for us as a district when we think about this order is the last bullet, which speaks about what happens with schools. So for schools that were already open, those schools could continue to be open, but for schools that were not yet open, which is us, we're not at this time permitted to open. And so we started our planning with an idea that we would be reopening. By our second advisory task force meeting. We came to learn that we had moved back into the purple. And so we just, I think, want to highlight here that this situation continues to be very fluid, and we continue to make our sort of best plans and do our best thinking given sort of all of the unknowns that continue around us. We can go to the next slide. Thank you, Julie. The purpose of this next slide is to sort of take us back just a little bit to actually our last special board meeting, which was one on October the 8th. And at the October the 8th meeting, we were just getting very new information from our county office about steps for reopening. So I did want to just touch on these because I think we can feel really proud of the progress that we have made in making these preparations in a short amount of time. So we continue to work with our labor partners around staffing at school sites and thinking about what it will look like when we reopen schools. One of the to-dos was procuring a contract for surveillance testing. Another to-do was to assign a COVID liaison. And then the final to-do was to implement and post a reopening document. And today I want to give high fives and high praise to our Executive Director of Student Services, Alexia Ritchie, who really has taken on the lion's share of this work in terms of coordinating our COVID efforts. And so we have procured a contract for surveillance testing. Ms. Ritchie is our COVID liaison, and I believe our first draft of a reopening document was posted today. So I did, thank you very much. So I did want to just be able to give an update on the status of these pieces. And again, give a huge shout out to Executive Director Ritchie for her really hard work in coordinating our COVID efforts. So thank you. And we can go to the next slide. So we're going to talk sort of mainly today about our thinking around scheduling for elementary, and then we will touch a little bit on some of the other conversations that are ongoing around health and safety. We can go to the next slide. Again, by way of reminder, at our October the 8th meeting, we were thinking about sort of two models for delivering instruction at elementary, specifically a hybrid model wherein students would be on campus some part of the week for their learning and would receive the rest of their instruction remotely. And so you see here, sort of the idea of a hybrid model is students attend school in small, stable cohorts, that they receive some balance of a mix of in-person and remote instruction. We have held onto this Wednesday sort of as a day in the middle of the week to allow for deep cleaning between cohorts. That continues to be a feature of our planning moving forward. That the remote learning days include some balance of synchronous and asynchronous minutes, and that we will ensure that all students receive the required SB 98 daily instructional minutes, which, just by way of reminder, is 180 minutes for TKK, 230 minutes for students in grades 1 through 3, and 240 minutes per day for students in grades 4 through 12. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So recognizing that the needs of our families differ and that there are families and or students who are at high risk for contracting COVID, there is language in the Ed Code that speaks about students who might be put at risk because they're medically fragile. Also, as a district, we made a commitment to allow students to continue in remote learning should they choose to do so, and also made a commitment that those students continuing in remote instruction would continue to receive instruction from AUSD staff and would receive synchronous and asynchronous instruction. We can go to the next slide. So here I'm going to hand off to, I believe, Ms. Poole. The next couple slides are just going to outline for you sort of briefly the purpose of our Elementary Reopening Advisory Committee Task Force, bit of a mouthful, sort of the folks that were involved in that task force effort, sort of the timeline a little bit, and then we're going to present to you the proposed thinking around scheduling. So for this, I'm going to hand off to Ms. Poole. Thank you.
Darn mute button, sorry about that. So yeah, thanks, Ms. Williams. So yeah, I'm here to present the purpose of the task force which was really to gather input from staff members and community members. I want to say a huge thanks to everybody who participated in the committee. We grappled with a wide variety of questions and concerns to which there weren't easy answers. But what helped us frame our thinking was that we knew that we wanted to get into what a possible schedule could look like. We wanted to have health and safety considerations for screening protocols, snack recess, attendance, arrival, and dismissal, and instructional materials. In order to help frame those conversations, we phrased each topic as an essential question and asked groups to come up with draft plans or suggested procedures and protocols that be implemented. We also asked folks to take into consideration site-specific considerations due to the very different nature of each of our facilities. We understood that there would be different arrangements that needed to be made at each site. We asked people to consider communication aspects of each of these pieces and to further identify other questions and challenges that we'd need to address as we move forward in the work. But framing all of these conversations was an articulation of what our priorities were. And one was to maintain cohort continuity. And what that meant was to keep cohorts safe and separate. We recognize that the more cohorts intermingle and have other people introduced to the cohort, that represents exposure and possible safety risks to students and staff alike. We wanted to minimize disruptions. As you know, what's been previously said about remote learning 2.0 from Dr. Wells, we do acknowledge that there are so many things that are working well with what we have in place. Not to say it's perfect, but there are some really great things happening. And in that we recognize that some students still need other things, and when we are open to addressing those pieces, but we wanted to take what was working about remote learning and not change it, and change it as little as possible in order to preserve continuity and consistency for students and staff. And then of course, health and safety is a major priority of everyone, to keep everyone on our campuses safe. So with that, I think the next slide I hand off to Ms. Georgeson.
Sorry. Good evening, everybody. My slide here is to really tell you about who the members of our community included. We wanted to make sure that we had a working committee or task force or advisory committee that collected all of the stakeholders that would be important for us to hear from, so that we could get all their points of view. So as you can see from this list, we have chosen to make sure that our principals were there, We wanted a broad section of certificated employees, including our general ed teachers, which each of us had at least one gen ed teacher from, or classroom teacher from each school site in varying grade levels. We wanted to make sure we had a special ed representation. We wanted one of our prep teachers and one of our PE teachers volunteered to be part of the committee. We wanted to make sure that our intervention programs such as ELD and reading were represented. So we had an ELD teacher there. And we also wanted to make sure that our ed tech TSA was present so that she could weigh in on perhaps not only her own classroom experience, but the challenges and or benefits to the ed tech support in the program we were looking at. In addition to, we wanted to make sure, given that this was a complete school experience, we wanted to make sure that our classified and clerical staff, as well as we had a para as part of our group, the special ed para educator. Important component to this group was also to make sure that we had parents, and I think each elementary had at least one parent represented in that group. And then there was a component of making sure in this one that we had our district nurse, Monica, as part of our group. And she really was a valuable member of helping us understand what were some of the considerations we needed to have in various components of our conversation, as well as we had board member trustee Kim Trutain as part of our committee as well. So I think all in all, with Marie Williams involved in it, we had on average, I think in each of the 4 meetings, about 20 members part of this task force. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm not sure who this goes to next. Thanks.
I'll take it next. Thanks, Ms. Ching. All right. So, so I think our next slide is is talking a little bit about the timeline. So I think we're going to go to Ms. Reimuller for a couple minutes here.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I appreciate that. And when you're ready, Julie, the next slide, please. Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you so much. So in addition to the task force timeline, we met every Monday in November in the evenings, and we really are very thankful to all of the members of the committee who were willing to spend evening meetings with us. And in addition to those meetings, we also garnered feedback from other folks at school. We had specialist input. We had additional meetings with our ELD team. That was the ELD teachers across all 3 sites on the 16th. And then we met with the prep teachers, which includes PE, science, music, and our librarians on the 18th. We met with reading intervention teachers who are, have the reading labs program on the 21st. Our fabulous clerical and office staff met together as a team on the 20th. They are really involved in thinking about some of these nuts and bolts that we have to attend to. And then we also had whole staff meetings, and those were all took place on December 2nd. So we really focused in November on meeting with folks, talking about how the task force was going, what progress we were making, and getting more and more input. Next slide, please.
I think, I think actually Ms. Reimuller, Julie is going to switch out the slides because we made just a slight update.
Okay.
So she's, I think, going to switch our screen share for just take 1 second.
Sure.
Just to update the screen share.
Mm-hmm.
And then next, Ms. Reimuller is going to talk about the TKK schedule in a hybrid model specifically. And then Ms. Georgeson is going to talk about the grades, the schedule for grades 1 through 5 in a hybrid model specifically. So just as soon as Julie gets this, the set of slides up here,
Sure thing.
Ms. Romula will talk about that. Thank you.
Was it slide 11?
Yes, please. Thank you.
There we go.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the 1st through 5th grade hybrid model, but TKK is a very special group, our transition kinders and our kindergartens. And so they had a lot of additional or special considerations. And the first thing we need to remember when we're talking about their hybrid schedule is that these teachers and these students share a classroom. So we have 2 teachers in one classroom, an AM kindergarten and a PM kindergarten, in addition to an AM kindergarten and a PM, AM and PM TK class. There are 8 classes at Cornell. That's 6 kindergartens and 2 TKs sharing 4 rooms. And there are 4 kindergartens at Marin. And keep in mind that all of Ocean View kindergarten students are integrated into all of our classes at Cornell and Marin. So we, as I said, we're on an AM, PM schedule, and the teachers also support each other and work supporting each other throughout the morning time or the afternoon time, which is what's happening in remote learning as well. We needed to make sure that we ensured adequate cleaning time between the cohorts because we have 12 kids from one class in the classroom. And then in the afternoon, that's in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we have a different 12 students in the classroom. And then we wanted to prioritize in-person instruction for the youngest students, except for the preschool, the youngest students in our system, the TKK students. So we looked to providing as much as 110 minutes on site when they were on site and 45 minutes of synchronous remote instruction, which is different than the 1st through 5th grade, and you'll see that later. But we just wanted to emphasize that we really felt that those youngest learners should be able to spend as much time as possible on site with this new hybrid model. Great, and then the next slide, please. So this is our proposed hybrid schedule for TK and K. And the way this is structured is in the morning, you can see that AM classes would be meeting from 8:15 to 11:20. And within that schedule, they would have, as I just mentioned, 45 minutes of remote instruction for all students. And that would go all the way across 5 days a week. They would meet with their teacher that they have, right? That most likely the teacher that they have right now. In fact, that was one of the key priorities was that students remain with their classroom teacher. So that would be 45 minutes across the board, Monday through Friday. And then they would have 110 minutes within their cohort. So it's a little bit complicated, but think about this. You have group AA, which is your AM group, in half of your AM group. They would have 110 minutes of in-person instruction, and your group BB, which is the other half of your AM group, would remain at home in the morning and do some remote instruction and some asynchronous instruction. Between the remote instruction and coming on site, there would be 30 minutes of travel and transition between those two. The same thing would happen for the PM class. You would have your AA group and your BB group for each of the PM groups. And then the other, on Thursday and Friday, the students would switch, and students would, the BB group would stay with their teachers on site, and the AA group would have their remote learning at home, a longer time of remote learning at home, or asynchronous learning. And we can explain how they would have both asynchronous and remote at home. And then the other cohort in the PM, it would be the BBPM group would be in person, and the AAPM group would be asynchronous. Again, with that 30 minutes of travel time, the PM classes starting at 12:25 approximately and ending around 3:30. The reason that the day goes a little longer there is because we wanted to maximize the cleaning time. This gives us 65 minutes of classroom cleaning time, which at Cornell we need to clean 4 classrooms within that lunch period time. Now on Wednesdays, just as with the other first through fifth grade students, the teachers would be collaborating, prepping, and supporting each other. And then the students would be having their remote learning and then have the asynchronous, and they might have their prep, their intervention, their special ed classes, which is also the same as the first through fifth. And one of the things I wanted to point out and to note is that the order of the remote 45 minutes and the in-person 110 minutes instructional blocks, we still haven't determined which one would be best first. For example, would there be mostly morning meetings and then the meetings right after lunch, or would the kids maybe come first thing in the day and then have a ending meeting? We're trying to structure that so that it works best for cleaning, for student schedules, and for learning, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reimuller. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So for this next slide, we're going to sort of follow the same pattern and just tell you a little bit about our thinking as it related to sort of planning the schedule for grades 1 through 5. As Ms. Reimuller mentioned, or I think as Ms. G mentioned, President Trutain was our board trustee representative on the committee, and Ms. Trutain has graciously volunteered to speak to the considerations that we talked about as it pertains to grades 1 through 5. And then Ms. Georgeson is going to walk us through the schedule. Thanks, Board President Trutain.
No problem. These were deep meetings of the task force and big meetings, as Ms. Georgeson said. There are a lot of participants. And I was really struck by how strongly our teachers wanted to maintain their current classes. I heard numerous teachers speak, and because when we started these meetings, you know, there were many possibilities. There were many options on the table, and the idea that some of these teachers might teach remote, you know, teach a different set of kids, and their classes would become split up was not at all what they wanted. They spoke strongly and repeatedly that, especially this year, because of all of the disruption and the strangeness of having a pandemic running through our country and the world, that they really felt that continuity needed to be maintained. They wanted to hold on to their kids. They felt that that was important for learning. They felt that that was important for mental health. And parents also spoke out at these meetings, and they said the same thing. They did not want their child to suddenly get a new teacher and be removed from their class and the teacher that they've had all of these months already. And so maintaining current classroom teacher assignments ended up to be a very, very high priority of the task force. It was also mentioned often by different groups of stakeholders that everybody wanted to preserve what is working with remote learning. So people wanted to take the job, the good things that are being done now, although of course it's not perfect and it's not right for everyone, but we really wanted to maintain what is happening now with our teaching. So we didn't want to just throw out the remote learning model. We wanted to keep its strengths and go forward from that. And that led to our third priority, which is supporting the families who remain in remote learning. We didn't want to have those students have a wrenching change in their program either. And we think that this model that is being presented tonight also strongly supports a potential pivot back to full remote learning. Because the classes will remain the same. We're going to save what's good about our remote learning program. And so we feel like this plan allows us to move into hybrid and then possibly move back to remote with as little disruption as possible. It will still feel familiar to kids. And lastly, another strong priority that came forward was that prep and intervention services needed to be offered remotely. It was because so many different students receive intervention services that if those were delivered in person, it would eliminate the cohorting that we're trying to maintain for safety. So the intervention teachers would need to work online with their different groups of students and not in person. Now, these are all my recollections and my notes from these meetings. I want to hand it back over to Assistant Superintendent Williams to fill in anything that I might have missed.
President Trutain, you didn't miss anything. Thank you very much. I think we can go to the next slide, and Ms. Georgeson is going to talk to us about the features of the grades 1 through 5 schedule. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to share with you the proposed schedule that we've taken a look at. And I think before I start going into the schedule itself, I think the first thing I want everybody to hear is, as a task force, we reviewed multiple samples that Marie Williams sent us. Samples with an AABB type schedule and samples that varied greatly. Most of us took a look at those on our own, but when we met, this was the first schedule that we gravitated towards, and we really dug into this schedule. And I was really impressed that as we worked throughout those meetings, there were very, very few voices that brought up other schedules that they liked better. We all seemed to really think that this was the one we wanted to really dig into and take a look at. So that being said, I think what I'd like to do at first is kind of tell you how we've got it grouped. Keeping in mind some of the priorities that the others had mentioned to you as far as cohesion and cohesion with teacher, cohesion with schedule. And what we heard from teachers was that and something as principals that we know is that the best learning time for students is in the morning. So with those three things in mind, what we saw in this schedule that really kind of lit off a light bulb for us was recognizing that the synchronous instruction in the morning, which is working for teachers and for many of our students for some of the reasons I just mentioned as far as the time of day and their best learning brain is engaged, that we felt like this was a good place for us to start. The ability to be able to support students, teachers, and families with continuity also allows us to teach in the morning through remote instruction, and they get to stay with their same teacher. And so for many of much of the week, their experience in the morning is going to be similar to what they currently have. And then I want to mention, just in the back of your mind, keep in mind, especially since Ocean View and the high school are experiencing this right now to some degree, that the fourth consideration that Mr. Tain mentioned about the consideration of pivoting back to remote instruction is really key and really important, because we want to be able to do that on a dime if we need to. We don't want to have to take time to reorganize and go back to remote with a different type of schedule. So we felt like this schedule helped support some of the things that the others had spent some time with. What this does also is, so from 9 to 11, we've got our online instruction. Teacher prep and early intervention can be done in the half hour prior, which for some families they experience now. They've got some intervention. There may even be a prep in there from that 8:30 to 9 o'clock hour. But what that really does is it offers our teachers the opportunity to prep and be prepared for their online instruction. And then after 11 a.m., from 11 to 11:30, this also is an opportunity for prep classes or intervention to step in. Because remember, one of our biggest priorities in bringing students back onto campus is we really want them with their classroom teacher as much as possible. We don't want their day cut up into various other experiences, because our experience is transition can be really challenging. And we know for students coming back, this is a big transition for them. So we want to offer them that continuity and that consistency when they are on campus. So the 11 to 11:30, again, we have some prep or intervention, all done online. And then we have our lunch, 45-minute break, and then a little time for transition for those two groups that need to transition to school. So if you take a look at the Monday, Tuesday, which is our AA group, those folks will be in person with their classroom teacher. And the BB group will be doing some asynchronous or remote instruction. It could be a combination of both, depending on the day of the week. And then you'll see over on the Thursday, Friday, you see essentially the same schedule, the morning schedule, which is with a whole class. So all students get 4 days a week, 9 to 11 with their whole class. All students have opportunity throughout the week to have prep or any intervention that they receive. And then in the afternoon, it's their in-person instruction. So if AA is in person on Monday, Tuesday, and BB is in remote, they would be receiving some type of remote or asynchronous instruction. What's not on here is listed our remote students. Now, our remote students, the beauty of this schedule is it gives them that continuity to their regular classroom teacher that they currently have in the morning. In the afternoon, this schedule offers us enough flexibility, depending on who are, and from the principal's point of view, who the staffing is, who are our remote teachers, how many do we need? And based on those two kind of data points, we're able to support those remote students with an Albany teacher who will probably, at least in my mind, will try to mimic what some of the in-person instruction is. So the hardcore instruction in the morning, we've got designed in theory to be our reading and math instruction. And in the afternoon, in theory, we've talked about the kinds of instruction that really benefit most from student interaction as well as student interaction with teachers. So such subjects as writing, science, let's see, I took some notes. Writing, science, some of the social emotional type activities. We probably want to put in a recess so that our kids within their cohorts can get outside and experience some play together. And then on our Wednesdays, what we did here in this schedule was tried to show you a little bit about what on Wednesdays teachers were doing as well as students. So you'll notice for students, the Wednesday is pretty familiar with what they're currently doing. We haven't changed much there. And then for staff, we're offering them that morning whole group instruction, kind of like to bridge the two schedules, AA and the BB kids together, and then offer them that collaboration time. This schedule is very demanding on teachers. For many of them, until they really get into it, they see this as having to manage perhaps 3, maybe 4 separate groups, particularly if they're engaged in the remote instruction with their remote kids. So we need to be able to allow some of that time on Wednesday for them to decompress and see how the 2 separate groups are working. I've been talking pretty fast, so I think I've covered most of it. I've got your AA, BB, your Wednesday schedule, both for students and teachers. And then kind of what I wanted to do is touch base with what we considered as our priorities and what we wanted to make sure we tried to hold together.
Thank you very much, Ms. Georgeson. For our next couple slides, Ms. Poole is going to touch on some of the other conversations that we were having in our committees around health and safety considerations and protocols. And I think one of the things, just to sort of mention, as Ms. Poole gets into maybe providing some of the overarching sort of themes that we discussed, is that our different sites have sort of different plant layouts. And so much of sort of the decision-making around some of these plans will greatly depend on sort of the physical space. And so you won't see here sort of, maps with, arrows and entrances and exits, but just recognize that our, we talked about sort of in concept these ideas, and then our principals intend then to take these concepts back to their sites and then sort of really work out the fine-grained details within the context of their own site, because they're all really quite different as you start to get into it. So I think Ms. Poole is going to give us sort of just an overview of what we talked about, and then we want to stop talking to give you all an opportunity to discuss and ask any questions. Thanks, Ms. Poole.
Yeah, sure. So starting out with our health screening, this is something that all elementary staff are very familiar with at this point, but we would need our families and students to be familiar with it as well. When we're ready to come back in person, this is a system that we received from Nurse Meng and Director Ritchie. So thank you for that, you guys. It's a way in which we can check our daily symptoms, and it's checked every single day before folks come onto campus. It's a Google form that walks you through questions of, do you have any symptoms? Have you been exposed to anyone with COVID? Has anybody tested positive? These kinds of questions that are very directive in terms of telling people, at this point, stay home, contact your site COVID liaisons, or submit your results and come to school. So it's the sort of thing that we need to monitor for students coming back to school. So in thinking about what that looks like, some considerations are, who is going to check all students? How will that be managed if we have to, give the thumbs up for students to come on campus because they've gone through the daily symptom checklist? That needs to be addressed. Also, what happens when students don't complete the checklist? Then how does that work? Who checks them through? And so these sorts of protocols were considered by the team, and we came up with a variety of possible scenarios around, lines and lineups. I want to say as well that in all of these scenarios, I don't imagine, at least from where I'm standing at this point, drop off at school looks the way it did when we were pre-COVID, where kids would just come onto the campus, play on the playground. There are issues about playing on the playground that I'm going to get into with snack and recess, but but there's a way in which we have to be very clear about what happens as soon as students get here. So around snack and recess, some of the challenges there are making sure that we keep cohorts separate. So those are those groups in each class that come to school as an AA group or a BB group. Some of the challenges around snack and recess are also similarly challenges with lunch, which is partially a reason why the schedule that Ms. G just took us through and Ms. Reimuller as well were so appealing, because some real challenges around managing students at the lunch hour were very difficult. But if we kept everybody in small groups maintaining their cohort integrity, we'd have to make sure that we separated out the playground in sections so that students knew exactly where they could play. There were questions about the play structure and cleaning the play structure and how often that could be done, if at all, in order to allow students to play on it. There were concerns and questions around the types of equipment that would be available to students during recess. Acknowledging that it might be, we might need to have class equipment allocated per class so that things weren't shared across cohorts. And I think that was it for those two. Julie, if you could go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. Thank you. So yeah, an additional arrival and dismissal considerations beyond the symptom checklist were, staggering start and end times. We were recognizing that if we had, just a line at the front entrance of each school or any entrance, depending on the site, that could be a very long line, depending on how many students decided to come back in person. And so staggering our start and end times to allow for students to get through the process made a lot of sense. Although I know some of the feedback that we got when we took this back to staff is that the staggered end time impacted instruction as well. So there's those considerations, but maintaining physical distancing in terms of people lining up to make sure that they get checked and being clear about what our visitor protocols are. I know that our families have enjoyed coming to campus and dropping their students off, and during, in these COVID times, that creates more students or more people on campus and more exposure and health, and therefore creates a safety concerns. So being clear about what our visitor protocols are and not allowing visitors to campus, and then what to do in the event of student illness and how to manage that. Colds and runny noses happen all the time, and kids get sick during the day. And pre-COVID, we had a very clear way of dealing with that. But now we're talking about having a designated COVID symptom area to keep students separated who may have exhibited symptoms after they completed the symptom checker, but when they've arrived onto campus, and how do we manage that? One thing that we found that was noteworthy in some of the plans that Ms. G mentioned were some community agreements around understanding that, we were going to, make sure that we are clear about what our symptoms were and keeping our children home if they were sick, because we recognize that that presents risk to the rest of the community. There are community agreements around travel and quarantine after being on airplanes and traveling to other states during this heavy COVID time, and just basically understanding, understanding what our collective responsibility is in this to keeping everyone safe. So that was another area that we discussed as well. And I think that's it for the health and safety. There was one more that's not on there, and that was materials management. That was something that we talked about just around, supplies being separate for students when they come to class, and what needed to be separated and what we could have collectively. And so those were just some more of our conversations. But I think that's it for the health and safety considerations.
Thanks very much. We'll go to the last slide. The next one. Thank you. All right. So this slide, I think, just to show that our work is ongoing. And so in terms of next steps, we will continue collaboration with our labor partners. As Dr. Wells foreshadowed at the beginning of this item, there will be some conversation around reconsideration of target reopening dates. On December the 17th, we plan to host a superintendent's forum where there will be two topics. The first will be a review of health and safety protocols led by Executive Director Ritchie. And then myself and the elementary principals will return to speak again about elementary reopening plans. Our secondary schools have also convened task forces. Since their date was a little after the date for elementary reopening, we will be bringing an update from our secondary sites in January. And then we also recognize that we will need to put out to our community a final survey, which asks them to confirm their return to school preference. That will come obviously after hearing information about the models for both elementary and secondary. So those are some of the next steps. We recognize there are other pieces also to be handled, but those are sort of some of the big ticket items that we know that we need to grapple with. That concludes our presentation. So I turn it over to you, Board President Trutain, for discussion and any questions. Thank you.
And just before that, I just want to add on December 17th, Superintendent Forum, that's going to be a night where we get into some good nitty gritty. And joining us on the panel, as mentioned, we would have Assistant Superintendent Marie Williams and our Executive Director, Alexia Ritchie, but we would have our own epidemiologist, Kaveri Trivedi, joining us, talking about what COVID is, what it isn't, and things we should be concerned about when we're inside the building versus outside the building. And so this would be a very worthwhile panel and discussion and update. So we urge the community to join us December 17th, Superintendent Forum from 6 to 8 p.m. We will send out reminders.
Thank you, Dr. Wells, and thank you, Assistant Superintendent Williams, and all of the elementary principals for presenting. What I'd like to do now is to turn it over to the board for questions. As has become our habit, I'm hoping that we can go through the trustees and have trustees just ask one or possibly two questions so that everybody gets a chance, and then we can continue going back through until the board questions are finished. At that point, we'll open it up to the community. I see some of our attendees have already raised their hands. We will get to you, don't worry. But let's first start with the board. Trustees, who would like to begin? Okay.
I think Vice President Duran wants to start. And then,
Okay,
is
please.
that what you're, she's raising her hand.
Yes, thank you for noting that. Like a kindergartner, I had my finger raised there. Let me just start off with one question, and it has the two parts to it, which basically is surveys. There was a survey sent out to the parents, and we have not heard any results from that. And I did ask that question yesterday evening. So I was wondering if we have an idea, at least, of where parents are at in terms of considerations of wanting their children to be back in person. And also, if there was a survey ever done for the staff. That was asked several weeks ago, if not a couple months ago. I think by Trustee Hinckley, and I'm wondering if we have any results from that as well.
And that I'd like to turn over to our Assistant Superintendent Marie, and we even have someone intricately involved, and that is Trustee Hinckley. So feel free to chime in, but I'm turning this over to Assistant Superintendent Marie Williams.
Yes, so I will say in regards to survey results, we do plan to share those in some detail at our upcoming board meeting. I can tell you now that based on the approximately 2,000 responses that we received, I'll read the percentages here. 29% of families indicated they were very likely to return to in-person instruction. 19% indicated that they were likely to return to in-person instruction. 15% indicated that they were unsure about whether or not they would have their students return to in-person instruction. 23% indicated they were unlikely to return to in-person instruction, and 14% indicated they were very unlikely to return to in-person instruction.
Assistant Superintendent Williams, can you also perhaps speak to the staff survey that Vice President Duran mentioned?
Yeah, so we have not sent out a survey. My understanding was that ATA, our teacher union, was gathering information. And so we did ask if rather than sending out a separate survey, we could share information with them.
So we might have an attendee that could possibly speak to that in a few minutes. But let's go on to Trustee Hinckley, who has her hand up for her questions.
Sure. this may be more than one. I'm trying to decide. So I think that so each student in grades 1 through 5 will get about 4 hours a week in person, I think, if I'm doing the math right. So one thing that would be helpful is to know, I guess I have two questions related to that. One is how does the overall amount of synchronous instruction that kids would be getting in this model, so both remote and in person, how does that compare to the amount of synchronous instruction they're getting now in the remote model? You may not have an answer to that right now, but I think maybe when it comes back, it would be helpful for me to just see, and I think for the community too, to be able to understand, will my kid have more live interaction with my teacher, whether that's remote or in person, or less or the same? I know you mentioned that the overall instructional minutes stays the same, but that is a combination right now of synchronous and asynchronous. And, you know, I imagine some people hearing this are disappointed that it's only 4 hours a week in person, even though I know my kids would love anything more than 15 minutes away from me. But I just want to note, you know, 4 hours a week, I appreciate all the work going into creating this model. Is there some thinking about, in the best case scenario, if things get better in March or April, whether we can use this same format to sort of scale up that amount of in-person in the same way you talked about pivoting back to remote? If we're in a position to pivot to more in-person, what would that look like, or have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, so to the first question, I think certainly we can bring that information the next time this comes back in terms of the comparison of time. And I will say, actually, as Ms. Georgeson was walking through the schedule this evening, and we didn't talk about it previously, but I did have that exact sort of thought that we might start here, and then as the situation improves, we might be able to extend the amount of in-person time, sort of, as, you know, so this might sort of, phase 1 is fully remote, this might be sort of a phase 2, and then there might be even an opportunity to continue to phase, depending on, obviously, their conditions with COVID. So I do think that's a possibility.
I want to go ahead and move to any other trustee that has a question. Trustee Clark or Trustee Doss, would you like to speak on this?
I have a couple of questions, but had some comments first. I just wanted to go over a few of the temporary closures associated with the stay-at-home order that's in place now, and then get some feedback from staff as to how that affects what we're doing right now to keep everybody safe in Albany specifically, in accordance to the facilities that we maintain. Says the following businesses and activities must temporarily close. Indoor and outdoor playgrounds, indoor recreational facilities, hair salons and barbershops, personal care services, museums, zoos, aquariums, movie theaters, wineries, family entertainment centers, card rooms, bingo halls, indoor swimming pools, except for the purposes of drowning prevention courses, including swimming classes with certified instructors, indoor and outdoor hot tubs, saunas, spas, and steam rooms, amusement parks, fitness and dance studios, except for outdoor fitness and dance classes with all participants wearing face coverings. These are, you know, all things that we know. I'm wondering how that relates to the facilities that we currently run, and if we have put things in place to adhere to that current order.
Trustee Doss, as it relates to 2 areas that we're responsible for that I thought, as you read the list, our playgrounds, we have responded according to the order and closed them down, consistent with the order. And as you know, some of our schools, for example, was easier to do at Cornell, not so much at Marin because of the open campus. And in full disclosure, we don't police the Marin campus after 2:30 or 3 o'clock because of limited resources. But we encourage the parents to adhere to safety orders and respect that to keep all safe. As relates to our pools, we are not opening our indoor pool as of yet, but we will continue to operate our outdoor pools consistent with the order, which allows us to do that.
Okay, sounds good. I'm wondering if there could be something placed at Marin, maybe like a sign of some sort, just to, help people understand the importance of, adhering to this so that we can curb this virus. You don't have to answer that right now, but just I'm hoping that maybe we can put something in place. Maybe we can take the rim off of the basketball hoop so that it will, help to deter people from going there so that we can, curb this and so that people can, stop getting sick, keep families safe, and, hopefully eventually, get kids back in school. But those are just my thoughts. Those aren't my specific questions. I'm going to ask 2 questions and then I'm going to give other time for other people and community to speak. I have a question about the TK. Talked about 2 teachers being in a classroom and those 2 teachers being in close proximity. And so that's one of the things that the CDC recommends we don't do. So I'm wondering if there has been some thought around maybe making some changes to that so that those teachers don't have to share those same classrooms. In my experience, since I just participated in the AM/PM process, the teachers usually work together during that time. One teacher usually get there early and work with the other teacher, in collaboration. Maybe if one teacher is like a veteran and the other teacher just started learning from them and, growing, in their profession. So I think it might be safer to have those teachers not actually share the classroom. So I'm just wondering if there's been some thoughts around that and how we can kind of use the space that we have to maybe spread those teachers out, seeing as everybody's not going to be on campus at the same time now, instead of trying to clean the specific area, just having those teachers have separate areas. My next question, and then I'll give time to respond, is the in-person support services. Does a stay-at-home order that's in place now limit us being able to provide the support services to students that are in need now? And are we able to still do that, or does it also cancel that out if that was already in the process of starting up?
The current order, Trustee Doss, allow us to continue to pursue in-person for our most needy kids, adhering to the strictest health guidelines that has been spelled out by the county. And also I wanted to say to your other question about the 2 TK and 2 teachers in the room, part of our presentation today about a scenario was to get input, the kind of input you just gave us in terms of reconsiderations as we move forward. So we appreciate that advice and instruction. So thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to go around again. And so I'm going to move back. Well, first of all, I want to check with Trustee Clark to see if he has a comment or a question. And then I will move back to Vice President Jerome.
Yeah, thank you, President Trutain. Whoever's conducting the slides, if they can go back to the one with the schedule for TK and K, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, thank you very much. Just want to make sure I'm seeing this correctly. So over here, when it says 45 minutes of remote instruction for all students, and then 110 minutes for in-person instruction, that equals 155, right? Isn't SB 98 180 minutes per day for that age group?
Yes, Trustee Clark. So the balance of the time, I think it's 25 minutes would be provided asynchronously and remotely.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure about that. Thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Williams. That was it, President Trutane, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll move back to Vice President Duran, and then we'll just go around again.
Okay, I wanted to see if it is like Trustee Hinckley said, it's basically 4.5 hours a week of the direct instruction, the in-person instruction. And I know when we initially had the road to return during the summertime, we basically, I remember a model which was, an A-B schedule, but it was like all day Monday and Tuesday. That was basically 10 hours a week. So we're really looking at half the in-person time that we were considering a few months ago. And I would just like to put out to the board members, if at the end of this conversation, we might consider a more formal kind of agreement that we would revisit this in end of February or March to see if we were in fact able to look again if things are looking better, and if we're able to provide more in-person time for the students that choose to do the hybrid. The other thing that I wanted to ask about was because I'm not clear about the remote instruction that students would have in the afternoon from the 12:30 to the 2:45. If it's Monday and I'm in the B group, I have remote instruction. I really want to be clear about which remote instruction will these students have. When will it be synchronous and when will it be asynchronous? Because I really want to be sure that the kids that are choosing to, or the parents that have made choices to have their kids go to hybrid, that they have as much synchronous time as the kids that are staying home full time. So could somebody sort of address that? If the students, for example, the BB students on Monday in the afternoon, the 12:30 to 2:45, it was said on the slide that they're getting remote instruction. Can we be assured that that would be synchronous instruction? And maybe the other part that I have is if somebody would be able to walk us through with teacher X and what their schedule looks like during the day. And because I was thinking that might help me think this better through, if I actually can have a sample of a teacher X and what their day looks like.
Would it be possible too to do that with that slide up, because for the grades 1 through 5?
Julie, if you could go to the next slide, please.
And before Assistant Superintendent Williams starts to address those questions, I just want to point out to the board that you're giving great feedback to our district office, and some of the questions that you're asking now, they will be able to address here and now, as we're about to do. And others, they're going to need to prep and make some slides, or perhaps make that walkthrough of teacher X and his or her day. And then that would become part of the presentation on December the 15th at our next regular meeting. So I just want you to keep that in mind. And the public also should know that too. We were going to, it's 7:15 now. This meeting was scheduled until 7:30, and we are certainly going to have public comment, and we can consider extending. But I want to let the public know also that in a way, this is the best opportunity for getting these important questions and observations in, and then some of the answers will come back later.
So I will start, and then I'll invite the principals to chime in to the question around, I think you said a guarantee about the afternoon being synchronous while remote. I think as we were thinking about the afternoon session for students, whether in person or remotely, our goal would be that students would receive as much synchronous instruction as possible, live synchronous instruction as possible. We didn't calculate out the number of minutes that would be provided synchronously and or asynchronously, because I think sort of as we get closer to planning what those activities look like, then some of the minutes might shift. But I think certainly as we were talking about that afternoon time, it was our goal that to the maximum extent possible, students would be receiving live synchronous instruction. And I don't know if the principals want to add on anything to that before we sort of give some thoughts about your other question.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that. Just very quickly, I think when I went through it, I don't remember if I specifically mentioned that our prep teachers, PE, library, science, music, as well as our ELD and reading instruction will remain synchronous instruction. So our hope is to build in a schedule that during the days in which they're not at school, the remote kids would be a part of some of that synchronous prep and or intervention instruction. What it also does is it then allows the classroom teacher to be with those kids during their live instruction for the majority of their afternoons. So we're getting the best benefit of our kids being with their classroom teacher when they are at school, as well as when they're remote. Our hope is to build a schedule that would allow them to receive as much synchronous instruction from our prep and intervention instructors.
And so I'll just say finally on that point, thanks, Ms. Georgeson, that in the initial sort of iteration of a hybrid schedule, if you recall, it was Monday, Tuesday, everybody was going to receive remote instruction on Wednesday. And then students who were in a group A and went to campus on a Monday, Tuesday, on, essentially on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday would be receiving remote instruction. And we had talked about at that time, as Ms. Georgeson just said, that those minutes might be in part be provided by our specialists, so PE, music, art, library. And so essentially in this schedule, what we have done is take what might have been occurring on a Thursday, Friday, and now provide an opportunity for it to be happening in the afternoons, right? So we've taken what might have happened a couple days a week and now have moved it to the afternoon time for students. I think your first question, which I'll answer, no, your second question, it sort of goes back to, and your second question was about sort of walk me through a teacher's day. I think as Ms. Georgeson has just sort of alluded to, there are many sort of teachers interacting with students in different ways in a day. And I think, we would be, so I'll give you an example. So the classroom teacher who is working with students in the morning, in the afternoon, they may or may not be then interacting with students in person and or remotely. That might be where the prep teacher steps in to provide the instruction. That also might be where, for example, a teacher who is teaching purely remotely would also sort of step into the picture in the afternoon. So I think as President Trutain said, maybe we can sort of go back and mock up a schedule for a teacher, but I think depending on the teacher's assignment, I think their day is going to look a little different. So I see Ms. Reimuller has her hand up and maybe wants to add something there.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to add in response to the question about having a pure AA day on Monday and Tuesday, and then a pure BB day. on site on Thursday and Friday. One of the reasons why we moved away from that was because we were concerned, and teachers were actually concerned about not being able to work with their students for long period of time. In other words, you would see and work with your students only 2 days, and then it would be, you wouldn't see them for 5 days. You would have a morning meeting on Wednesday, but then they would be asynchronous with other teachers, of course, so they would have synchronous time, but it wouldn't be with the classroom teacher. And that was the concern for the classroom teacher, of building a continuity of scope and sequence of lessons and learning time, and having such big gaps away from half of their class throughout that second half of the week. So this way, the classroom teacher is with all students all 5 days of the week and can build the continuity of the lesson plan. It's very difficult to have lessons only twice a week and then wait till next Monday to see them. I hope that makes sense.
Okay. I think we should move now to Trustee Hinckley. Do you have further questions or comments before we go to public comment?
Yeah, first I'll just make a comment about the slide, although my video is terrible, so I can't see it right now. But I think one thing that might be helpful is that if we're keeping the classes intact, that really each class has 3 groups. And I think that's what might be a little confusing about these cohorts, is that each class is divided into 3. It's some share of the class will be always remote, and then there will be 2 different cohorts that do this Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So I think it might be helpful if we sort of refer to them as A, B, and C, and then as the schedule evolves, for example, looking at this slide, we have 2 of those groups. B and C are remote at the same time in the afternoon, which in theory means they could be together. And the same thing Thursday, Friday. So I think that might be helpful in sort of conveying this, is rather than having the remote group be a sort of add-on, that we just establish that we have A, B, and C for each class. And we assume that, we know the proportions are going to be different for each class, but that we're going to have that structure. And I think that'll be one of the interesting things as we get the final parent surveys, and then as the suitable cohort size fluctuates with the virus in the spring, there may be additional opportunities that open up. So if all of these classes are about 25 kids, and we know off the bat that likely 10 of those kids are going to be remote, there may be some different options for how often kids are able to come back if conditions improve. But anyway, so I think when this comes back to us, it might be helpful to just refer to groups A, B, and C, so that we're able to sort of follow a group a little bit more easily. So Clementina asked most of my questions. So my last one is, what does happen to the pods that we've been able to start? What does this look like for our special day class? I know that you said most of the intervention will have to be remote because of the too much exposure for our staff to be safe, but what can we do for the kids that are very high needs going forward after we transition to hybrid?
I think you hear crickets right now. Is that correct, Trustee Hinckley? I wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I thought my whole internet had finally given up.
Okay, no, not at all. In terms of what happens when we move forward with intervention groups, that we will continue. For example, the hubs that are put on pause because of the infection will resume come the first week in January. For example, the hubs at the preschool are scheduled to resume, I believe, January 4th. And so they're back up and they'll be back up and running along with the other interventions that we had going on.
So I guess one thing it would be helpful to hear more about perhaps next week is how do you reconcile those safety concerns that someone mentioned earlier in the presentation? Will they have their own class, or, you know, how do we balance that? Because we were told earlier tonight that all of that support would be remote. So this may be something we have to hear more details about next week, but I'd like to have sort of a concrete idea of how that's going to work.
Yeah. Okay, duly noted, and we can delineate between what would be remote and what may not be remote. For example, the preschool hubs will not be remote, they will continue. But we can delineate that next week as you requested. Duly noted.
Yeah, I'm specifically interested in TK through 5 because they're going to also have this in person if they opt for in person. So great, thanks.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I see the time is 7:26, and I'd like to ask the board for a motion to extend our meeting. Then we will check in with the remaining trustees who haven't had a second chance to ask a question or make a comment. And then we will go to our public.
I move that we extend our meeting is half hour sufficient, or should I make it an hour?
I would suggest just going ahead and making it an hour because our attendees haven't raised their hands yet. And that'll also give us time to wind things up at the end.
Okay, so be it, 1 hour extension.
I'll second.
Thank you all. I hear that second from Trustee Hinckley. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Student trustee Corzo Clark,
Yes.
student trustee Mala,
Yes.
trustee Hinckley,
Yes.
trustee Doss,
Yes.
trustee Clark,
Yes, and I'd like to request that we get to the public sooner rather than later. This was a workshop tonight, and there's going to be another board meeting next week to go into this in more detail. So if we can please let the public speak, that would be great. But yeah, my vote is yes. Thank you.
vice president Duran,
Yes.
president Trutain.
Yes. Okay, and thank you. The motion passes unanimously for a 1 hour extension. And Trustee Clark, I believe that was your comment that you wanted to go ahead and make progress toward public comment.
Yes, thank you, President.
Okay, and so actually, I see Trustee Doss. I also see our student board member, Corzo Clark, would like to make some comment. Not
Our
sure.
student board member can go first. I don't think he has spoken yet, so go for it.
Thank you, Trustee Doss. Audrey and I just had 2 quick questions. The first one was about the schedule for K through 5, if you could bring that back up, specifically about the sort of like commuting or transition period at lunch that's around like 11:30 to 12:15, 11:30, yeah, 12:15 to 12:30. That's not exactly like a mellow part of the day. A lot of parents will likely be at work during that time or something. Is there, we were wondering if there was any way that the district was planning on, or if they could like accommodate parents who couldn't necessarily drive their kids to school at that time, and what if that's been discussed at all.
Yes, I would say, and the principals, feel free to chime in. I will say that when we discussed the schedule, we did talk, and we did have parents on that committee, and we did talk about the difficulties of starting an in-person day midway through the day. And so we were balancing that with, when would be sort of the best time to offer core instruction. And we sort of decided as a committee that would happen in the morning. So we did talk about sort of a couple things around maybe sort of like, childcare came up as a topic. To mitigate sort of the needs of parents who might not be able to have their students, bring their students to campus in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in the same spirit, Trustee Mala has not had a chance yet. Would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. I was wondering if you're able to answer this question at this time. Otherwise, we can talk about it next week. But if you're able to expand upon the symptom zone, I was just wondering if there's a designated person that would be overseeing those students, or if there's a plan whether that will be inside or outside.
Sure. I would say yes. Yes, we talked about the possibilities of which person or persons might be designated. I don't think that we identified any specific classifications or persons, recognizing that, you know, some of this, some of the logistics of this, right, would be subject to negotiation. So we did certainly, though, talk about, you know, who would be best suited to provide the symptom check and how that system would be monitored from start to finish. We did have quite a bit of conversation about that, but I don't think at this time we have sort of specific details to provide you.
Thank you
I
so
can add
much.
that we have identified outdoor areas for isolation spaces at each site, though. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Doss, please go ahead.
I'll be real quick so that we can get to public comment. I'm wondering about the movement between the campuses when we do move to in-person instruction. Has there been discussion about that? I mean, we're very collaborative here in Albany, so I'm assuming that there is travel between the three campuses, but that can also be dangerous if one person is infected and then goes to all three campuses. Then instead of one campus being shut down, all three essentially will, you know, get closed. So I'm wondering if there's been discussion around that. And then my other question would be if we could follow up about dates for, or a follow up to the community around the in-person support, just a little bit more detail as to, you know, when parents can expect that, and if they need to sign up for it, or if it's going to be something that is, you know, happens automatically. Or
Trustee Doss, thank you for those two questions. I can take the first one, and the principals can chime in on the second one, along with our Assistant Superintendent, Marie Williams. The first one, travel from campus to campus. I went on and made the common sense executive decision to limit travel from campus to campus under the auspices of health and safety. I think last Friday was a stark illustration of why it's so critical to limit travel, as you just illustrated. And so we're moving forward. We are including restricted travel from site to site as much as possible because of the consequences that can occur as a result of not doing that. So the short answer is yes for that one. The second question, in-person support, what that might look like. I think the principals are best suited to talk about some of the plans they have rolling out in terms of in-person support. And then, as I mentioned before, Assistant Superintendent Williams could talk about further some in-person supports that are possible moving forward.
Sure, I could jump in on thoughts on in-person support. I think that Ms. Georgeson alluded to that earlier around keeping prep teachers and specialists remote. The same is true for staff members who travel from site to site. And I appreciate the acknowledgement of understanding that these folks need to be delivering their services remotely to limit the spread of the potential spread of COVID. And so our thinking is that we would have as many staff members, you know, who were serving multiple cohorts, even at multiple sites, would deliver those services remotely. Does that answer your question?
There's just some intervention that just doesn't work well remote. And so I'm just wondering if we're having discussions around how we can safely help those students. I mean, there's some stuff that we can do remote. Obviously, we're doing it and it's happening and everybody's doing great. And I'm not putting anybody down or saying anything negative at all. There's just some stuff you can't do remote. And so I'm just wondering how we're figuring out how we can safely bring those students on campus to implement those interventions that can't be done remotely, and how we're doing it in a way where you don't have like one intervention specialist going to 3 different sites or, things of that sort. I'm not expecting to have an answer tonight. I'm just saying it because I think that is something we need to think about and discuss and figure out how we can, safely do that. And those students are in need right now. And so I'm just wondering how we can, making sure we keep it top of mind and how we can safely get those students on campus and get them the help they need. But with that, we can open it up to public comment. But if we can follow up and then maybe talk about that at the next meeting, as President Trutain mentioned.
One quick question though, before moving on, just so I understand how to consider thoughtfully your question. Can you be more specific about which interventions you're referring to, or is it just interventions in general?
What I would do is that I would duly note it and much appreciate it, and then we could grapple with it and bring it back for all the board, including Trustee Doss. I prefer to do that. And that way we could just get into the public comments. So I took it down as a piece for us to continue grappling with.
Great, thank you.
That's fine, but also an example would be like speech.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think that all the trustees can expect that the district office might be reaching out to you regarding specific questions to get some more detail from you as they prepare for next week's meeting. And with that, I want to move us to public comment. Thank you, public, for being patient. You've waited for this chance. If you do have a public comment, please raise your hand. We will take them in order, and you'll have 2 minutes. Our first speaker is Grace Key. Please go ahead.
All right. Hi. Thank you so much. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, in light of the infection that we were informed about last Friday, can we expect that to be pretty much the expected protocol in case someone does test positive? And then second, for the tracking of COVID, I'm wondering, is the Albany School District participating in the waste management monitoring for a possible COVID presence so that we know in case cases are spiking in that particular area? And then something else that just occurred to me, student parents at KALB have quite a few of their children enrolled in these schools as well. And I know part of that scheduling would be difficult for them to adhere to, given that their classes are also pretty scattered throughout the day, and trying to transport children to classes while also remaining in a remote learning program for themselves as well might prove to be a bit problematic should they attempt to try to send their children back to school. So are there any suggestions, recommendations about how we can serve parenting students as well? And then also the other prior 2 questions about tracking the wastewater and COVID response in case of infection. Thank you.
President Trutain, I think I have 3 questions there. The first one was, are we going to continue with the expected protocols that we adhered to last week? And the short answer is yes, we are adhering to both state and Alameda County Health Department protocols. And we're in consultation with them regarding these kinds of issues. Our executive director, Alexia Ritchie, has been taking the lead and has built a relationship with our health department. And so we will continue to adhere to these kind of protocols as we try to mitigate and keep our staff, students, and community safe. So the short answer is yes for question number 1. Are we monitoring cases and that other piece? We are monitoring cases along with the county health And we're meeting with County Health weekly, our chief health official, Dr. Moss, who makes the final call on what we can and can't do here in Alameda County. In terms of suggestions and recommendation, that one's a little dicey because what is a recommendation for one family wouldn't apply to another. But we do have some common recommendations that we have listed on our website and that folks can refer to, and we will continue to communicate recommendations that we get from the County Health Department, and some of which we would come up with ourselves based on our unique needs.
Just as a point of clarification, I think that Ms. Key was talking about is the wastewater from our schools being monitored for the presence of virus. So is the toilet water being monitored? And Dr. Wells, you could certainly respond to that. I don't know if any plans to do that type of monitoring.
I'm not aware of us monitoring toilet water. I would consult with the County Health to inquire about what waste management and others might be doing. But full disclosure, I'm not aware of any toilet water monitoring.
People may have heard that UC Berkeley is monitoring the village's wastewater, and they did identify that there is spreading COVID there. So they may be someone for us to be in dialogue with as they continue to monitor.
Thank you for that, Trustee Hinckley.
Thank you, Ms. Key, for those comments. We'll move now to our second speaker, Shannon Huffaker. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to first appreciate the work that everyone has done putting together this plan. I have to say that I am not seeing a lot of evidence in this plan that the committee has utilized the evidence and experience of schools that have opened nationwide. For example, New York City, which is hardly Trump country, has abandoned its hybrid schedule, recognizing that the utility of the hybrid schedule in elementary school age children was limited and it was actively harmful to some children. I would at some upcoming meeting like to hear from the contracted epidemiologist whose name is Kavita Trivedi about the evidence that we have regarding elementary school students and their scheduling from all around the country. I would also like to thank the student board members for bringing up the very important issue of childcare, or if there's not an on-site childcare, is it actually expected that full-time working parents would drive their children to school in the middle of the day? If my child was younger, this schedule would be nearly impossible for me as an essential healthcare worker. Again, I want to thank you for all the time, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huffaker. We will take that into consideration for presentation at next week's meeting. I'd like to move to Suzanne Zalev, please. Ms. Zalev, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I'd like to see a hybrid plan that has the elementary school kids in school for full days, 2 days a week, and not for 2 hours a day, 2 days a week. That's not enough. And by the time they get to school, they're going to have to turn around and go home practically. So I would like to see a plan with full days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Zalev. Our next speaker is Angela Marsiglio. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for opening up the question. I guess I've heard a lot about prioritizing our most needy and vulnerable students, and then people arguing for everyone else staying remotely. And I think this new plan is prioritizing a lot of remote learning. I wondered if you can speak more to the hubs to let us know actually what are you doing for the most vulnerable students, and also as our previous parent mentioned, what are you doing for parents who are essential workers who need to be on site for full days? They've just been paying for childcare all this time, and I wonder if that will continue, how we can support them.
Thank you. Yeah. We will move to Yael Bloom. Ms. Bloom, go ahead.
Thank you. Today I sent an email to the board and to Dr. Wells sharing the Berkeley Unified School District resolution encouraging the state to include teachers and in-school personnel to receive the COVID vaccine in the first phase after the identified highest priority populations. I hope that AUSD can take a similar action at the December 15th meeting. And I believe this is a vital first step into true, safe, and reopening of our schools. I also wanted to highlight that the fact that there is not a representative from the Department of Education on the state's COVID vaccine task force, yet there are reps from Food and Ag, Veterans, Transportation, etc. And so I hope that our board and our superintendent can take leadership to advocate for education leaders to be at the table on this very important task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bloom. Board, would you like to comment about that resolution being considered at the next board meeting? I see Frank Wells appears to have given a thumbs up.
You mean comment in terms of, do we agree? Would we like to see it presented
Yes.
so that we can?
Yes, would you like to see that on the agenda at the next meeting for consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to see that on there. I think a great point was made. She stole my thunder. You know, I was going to mention her email and make the suggestion at the end of the meeting. But I'm glad that it was made, and I think it's a good idea, and I think it's important for us to support it. So, you know, I think we should do that, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add something real quick, President Trutane.
Go ahead, Trustee Clark.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Yael Bloom for sending the email. It was really informative, and it was quite shocking when she mentioned some of the other groups that are involved, and somehow they left out educational leaders in there. So I would recommend that the board does take this up at the next meeting, and I want to thank her for bringing that to our attention.
President Trutane, you know there are still a couple of speakers, right?
Yes, let me get to those. Our next speaker is Dashel Stewart Van. I'm sorry, I can't see the whole name. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, hi, this is Steven actually, but yeah, you've got the right family. Just wanted to, again, thank everyone for the time they spent on this. I really appreciate it. One concern that I do have here is I haven't heard very much about what Trustee Hinckley referred to as Cohort C, the all remote group. I mean, as it was mentioned earlier, that seems to be approximately 50% of the surveyed population here, and yet I haven't heard much about the plans for how their education would persist when and if this hybrid is put into place. So if we could address that a little bit now and or make it a priority in our next board meeting, I'd really appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Point taken. I think this illustrates the sort of the holistic thought of the our community and the board, that we do want to consider all the groups of kids, the kids that remain in remote and the kids that choose to go into hybrid. And we need to be tracking all of that as we move forward. Another hand has been raised. Joel Urvice, please go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Really want to appreciate all the good thinking that went into this, the reopening plan, especially for the first to fifth graders. And Trustee Trutane, when you went over the scheduling considerations, preserving teacher assignments and supporting remote students, supporting those families that want to return to in-person, I think all those things are really reflected in the proposed schedule in a I think, pretty fair and balanced way. for the groups that are in the afternoon remote, be they the hybrid students that are, remote for 2 days a week, or the full-time remote cohort. I appreciate the emphasis on maximizing as much synchronous time as possible with a variety of teachers. That's great. What is still a little unclear in my mind is, so you have a group of students that you call it the AA group that will receive in-person instruction from their lead teacher. And then you'll have the BB group that will receive that same instruction, for on Thursdays and Fridays. So as Trustee Hinckley put it, there's going to be a C group. It's still not clear to me how they will receive the same instruction that the students who will eventually be in person, whether it's the Monday to Tuesday or a Thursday, Friday, when will they receive the same topics or same content?
Thank you, Mr. Urvice. I appreciate your comment. I think that we will see more on that at next Tuesday's meeting on the 15th so that we can track all of those groups. We have a comment from Chris Karuba-Katz. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm really excited with what was presented tonight. But I do want to ask, because the survey did not propose this model. And so personally, our family did not answer in the affirmative of coming back because our greatest concern was our daughter keeping her same teacher Monday through Friday. And so this proposal does anticipate that she would keep her teacher. So I think that we might have answered the survey differently. So my question is, would a new survey now be presented to all of the parents in the community? Because I think you might get different results. I have a second question, and it deals with who is willing to come back. Somebody earlier mentioned that it's about 50% have indicated that they would like to stay home. So if you're looking at 40 to 50% of the student population in this age range wanting to come back, do you think that the school could offer a Monday through Friday option? As y'all know, our family is in law enforcement and have a Monday through Friday type job, and we've had to outsource. Our daughter in second grade is at the Village and has been since they've opened, and there have been no positive tests. So I'm wondering if you're willing to entertain a Monday through Friday option for frontline workers, essential healthcare workers, and families like mine who need a Monday through Friday option.
Thank you, Chris, for that comment. I do think we'll hear more about that also next Tuesday. I'm going to give a minute for any more attendees to raise their hand. I do want to circle back. There was a question about our special needs students and a request to hear more about our plans in that direction. That question was not addressed here at this meeting, but I just want to make the comment that that is being thought about and worked on. And I know that the district is spending time. Our special ed director, Dr. Ortiz Front, is definitely working on that and figuring out what we can do. And so even though we did not have an answer for you right away, and for the other members of that, there are a lot of people in our community who have that same concern. I think that we will hear more about that in the near future, and please be reassured that it's not being forgotten. It's on the front burner. It's one of the most difficult challenges of teaching during the pandemic. Okay, not seeing any further hands raised by the public. I do want to move it back to the board If board trustees would like to perhaps summarize what they would like to hear a little bit more about, now would be the time.
I'd like to pose a question. Again, not expecting an answer right now, but just something to think about. If we move to the in-person and there's a smaller number of students that decide that they want to come back. So for example, we're thinking that we're going to have 20 students, but then actually there's only 7 or 8 in one group, and then like 7 or 8 in another group. If the groups are like smaller, are there any considerations to combining those groups and then extending the in-person time? Instead of having 2 separate, really small groups, if less students decide that they want to return. Because I mean, there might be some families that say, hey, that we're thinking about returning before, but because a vaccine is closer, they might say, well, we're not, going to do that. We're going to wait, or for one reason or another. I'm not sure why, but if they do decide to do that, and Group A only has 5 kids in it, and Group B has 5 kids in it, instead of having 2 really small groups, and having one group, and then having 4 hours of time versus having the 2 hours. So I'm just wondering if there's been some thought around that, or if we could start, thinking about that. And then I do appreciate Chris's comment about sending out, an additional survey now that the community has this additional information. I think it would be beneficial to kind of, send it out. And I think it'll help to plan around the question that I'm asking, which is, based on all the information that parents have now, would you send your kids back? Once you sign up to either be in person or be remote, that's your commitment for the semester. And then once we have that commitment, then we can plan around having more time or less time, or combining the groups or leaving them separate, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Doss. Yeah, go ahead, Superintendent Williams.
I just wanted to clarify to the comment before, and then also Trustee Doss. It was always our intention that there would be 2 surveys, and we recognized that we were asking parents to give us sort of a very preliminary sort of preference in the absence of this kind of information, which we recognize might change their choices. And so we will be reporting on the preliminary results, but certainly as we move forward, it is absolutely our intention to gather a binding decision from parents. This certainly wasn't that decision. This was a survey that was administered anonymously. We didn't capture any personal identifiable information. We just wanted to get a sense from families of what they were thinking, and we recognize that some of those choices might change between now and administering the second survey. So I just don't want the community to be concerned that somehow the information that they provided us is the only time that we were going to ask them. We certainly will be sending out a second survey. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Williams. Now we'll move to Trustee Clark. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, President Trutain. I just wanted to make sure I got a chance to speak before the meeting was done. So should I wait, or is now okay?
No, now is the perfect time.
Okay, thank you. I know staff has been working really hard, and we have a meeting just next week, but I really like the suggestion from Yael Bloom. So if the board is in agreement with that, if possible, if it could be presented at the next board meeting, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Doss. Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. Now we'll move to Trustee Hinckley for her final comments.
Yeah, I also would like to thank you guys for all the work. I see some of it behind the scenes, and I know how complicated it is. So I guess this may be reiterating, but what I'd really love to see next time is a more of a sense, as others have said, of the sort of progression of each different cohort's days and how they each get the same set of instruction. And then again, an update about the current status of how we're helping our neediest students in person and how we would continue to be able to do that for those students that really need in-person help after moving to a hybrid model. I'd also like to hear an update on what we're thinking about childcare, school-age childcare going forward. I know we're only serving a very few kids right now because it's remote, but we did, as a board, talk about what it would look like to be able to offer some of that in person when we did move to a hybrid model. So if we could hear just what the planning process is for that, that would be great. And then the last thing I'll say is just a little bit of a plug. We've gone almost a whole meeting without hearing the words filtration and air circulation. The one thing, as Trustee Doss mentioned, about having 2 teachers in a classroom, just thinking about the most important cleaning in between those 2 cohorts in TKK is going to be flushing out the air system in between those 2 groups. So if we could make sure that that's part of the presentation that we get next week, is, you know, wiping down the surfaces is not the most important, but how do we make sure that we get the guidelines on how much time and blah, blah, filtration needs to happen in between those 2 groups, because that's the safety piece that jumps out at me on this plan. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Trustee Hinckley. Vice President Durand, do you have final thoughts or comments?
Yes, I wanted to, first of all, acknowledge as well everybody that took the time and the effort and all your energies into developing this plan. I kind of feel that we're all so quiet tonight. You know, there's like 100 participants and it's so low key. It's like the virus is really beating us up, right? And but we could never say never, and we got to keep going. And I just need to say that I really do feel that we are not giving enough attention to the most vulnerable kids, the kids that just academically need to be in school, the kids that for social, emotional, mental health reasons need to be in school, which is all our kids basically, and parents that are essential workers. This plan doesn't really do very much, and a couple parents already has spoken to that, and it's just so sad and poignant that we're not doing very much. And it's, you know, last month Dr. Fauci said close the bars and keep the schools open. You know, maybe if we had done that initially, we wouldn't be quite in the place that we are today. But given where we are, I would like, since we have another week, for staff to really think a little bit deeper and maybe outside the box and see what other things we can do to really address the needs of kids, and that just, for whatever reasons, absolutely need to be in school. And this program or this plan is so limited. And which is not to say that staff and teachers didn't try, but all I'm saying is that if we could just make one more effort to see if there's any other place that we could come up with some options for the kids. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Durand. I want to just bring it back to Dr. Wells or Assistant Superintendent Williams, in case you have any closing remarks before we adjourn this workshop.
Yes, absolutely. I want to say that I wanted to thank the board and the community for providing additional input. I want to thank the board for being so clear about the direction and our next steps. I appreciate all the comments. We noted them as we go back and grapple with making some adjustments to bring back to the board 1 week from today. And so we're excited about the possibilities, and we may need to illustrate a bit more about how we really hone in through a system about our most vulnerable. I think the school sites have done a tremendous job. We just haven't articulated it. And I think we're going to bring that next week so folks know what we're doing for our most vulnerable kids through a system that we adopted. One of the areas we have to work on is the in-person kinds of intervention that kids can benefit from. And that's one of the areas that we may need to hone up. And so we appreciate all the feedback. We appreciate the teammanship as we look at how we grapple with the vetting process together. And so we're back at the drawing board first thing in the morning. And thank you for all your support, the community and our teachers and to the board. So that would be my closing remark as we look at our next step.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wells. And this meeting will now adjourn. Thank you.